I decided to see the bastards who run the place. By 9:30 one morning, I was at Westminster Station, almost following some besuited men into a revolving glass door that was manned by security. Duly repelled, I walked up to street level and walked the length of the Houses of Parliament. Every entrance was marked private. I asked a policeman at the last, and he said 100 yards back, but they don't get in until 2:30. Of course, I could have found that out before if I'd just taken the trouble. I wandered into a quiet little park with a statue of Emmeline Pankhurst at the end, and I sat on a bench overlooking the Thames, wondering what to do. It was a sunny day, but it was too cold to sit for long. And just across the street was Westminster Abbey. So passing this big blue wooden structure marked the Westminster Abbey experience and the Abbey itself, I felt drawn to a sign that said Broad Sanctuary and found myself in Dean's Yard, which is a quiet square about 200 yards across with a narrow service road around a patch of grass. Feeling like a politely suffered intruder, I walked past all these wonderfully private-looking buildings and tried to peer at to see who the names on the doorbells were, until I came to what appeared to be the main entrance of the Westminster Choir School. I stood there, and either side of the main doors, there were these big, tall, black lampposts. I wondered if they actually were Victorian gas lamps. And there was a third one at the bottom of the steps, right on the edge of the green, that was much shorter and tilted over. Also on the green was a set of portable goalposts and a black cat lounging on the crossbar. I looked at the trees. 3 were very old. 3 were just mature. 3 were handsome young trees, and 3 were freshly planted. There's a little alley goes from Dean's Yard to the Abbey. Halfway up it, I saw there's this little private house with these steep stone steps, gloriously bedecked with flowers. And the name on the door said, Miss Eileen Sly. I thought about Sly, but she must be clever to get a place like this to live. The first thing I saw in the Abbey was a purple wagon selling coffee. I drank mine, sitting on the stone sill of a glassless window and looking out at some workmen across the cloister. This area was given over to brass rubbings. There were pictures strewn across the windowsills and the tables, mounted on blocks of dark wood with little coloured stickers on to indicate price. And there were countless memorials. I mean, every bit of wall and every bit of floor was covered in. This young child said to his mum as they walked past, Mom, these are graves. We're walking on dead bodies. And I wandered up a random corridor and came by accident upon the oldest garden in England. Admission was the 20 pence, just taken by a little honesty box nailed to the wall beside it, and I went in. It might be the oldest. It's not the most interesting. All it was just this like big stack of white plastic lawn furniture in a square white tent. I sat on a bench for a while, listening to a painful violin practice coming from a window to my right. And then in the Abbey proper, I saw there were this rack of candles glimmering away, and underneath them in rows were these unlit candles and this strange cabinet, and the grave of Ramsay MacDonald was half covered in stacks of brown plastic lawn furniture. The tomb of the unknown soldier was roped off and strewn with poppies. It was that time of year. It was finally time to see the monkeys. I went to the Houses of Parliament, and their lineup for the House of Commons had gotten enormous. The one for the Lords was quite short, so I thought, I'll do the Lords, and if it's interesting enough, I'll come back for the Commons. So I got in the building quite quickly, and once I was in there, I found the sheer force and confidence of the decor was so overwhelming that it sort of stunned me into, well, for the only time in my life, I went into the wrong toilet. And When I came out, I discovered we'd been directed to sit on this bench facing an enormous tapestry, opulent tapestry of some events I'm sure ordinarily I would have recognized, but I couldn't on this day because of my toppled senses. And we just were made to sit there until the procession of the Commons came in. And lo and behold, on time, the Commons walked past us with Betty Booth right at the front, smiling like a 4-year-old pretending to be queen. And after that, we were told to walk up some stairs. So I was heading up the stairs and I looked at, just paused to consider an etching on the wall. One of the guards poked me and he said, "They're in living colour upstairs," which indeed they were. At the top of the stairs, we were directed to sit in this very steep wooden gallery, fantastically, majestically uncomfortable seating, where we had this very steep view down of the lords who were sprawled and hunched and slumped over 2 sets of benches facing each other. And I assumed the gigantic square cushion in the middle was the woolsack. It's like there's a television screen that announces the speaker and their business. So I knew that the rather quaint old gentleman that kind of slowly lurched to his feet was the 5th Earl Russell. And he was there to make some objections to some asylum and immigration bill. He stood up. A number of people who looked nearly dead managed to kind of rouse themselves to get up and go and leave the room. Lots of people left. But as soon as he started speaking, a clock on the wall started. I guess that's to discourage bores. But I don't know how well it managed. He did have a quaintly meticulous way with a point, and these extraordinary wisps of silvery hair that stuck out the side of his head, and he dropped his notes with comic frequency, and any comic actor who'd imitated him and how slow he was to pick up his dropped notes would be a very bold and confident performer. And every so often, this sort of sturdy, middle-aged Scottish fella would kind of spring out of his seat and make some remarks with an attitude of breezy sarcasm. You might notice that I haven't said anything about what was said because they had these microphones hanging from the ceiling to enhance the sound, and they enhanced it so much you couldn't hear a word. On my way back down the steps, I stopped and I looked at a picture on the wall, and it was of the 1st Earl Russell debating the Great Reform Bill of 1832 in the House. And I thought, that guy is an ancestor of the bloke I've just been watching. So was Bertrand Russell. And in fact, the 5th Earl Russell reminded me of nothing so much as that busker I'd seen in Leicester Square a few weeks earlier, except he probably had a better place to go home to that night. I walked up Whitehall and I stopped to look at a scout troop who were having a photograph taken on the steps of number 10, and then walked into Trafalgar Square and sat there reading for a while. One of the books I bought the last time I'd been in the West End about the Battle of the Beanfield and the strange hearsay history of Wally Hope. And then I made my way back in the evening to Parliament Square to go and see my friend Dave, who was performing at the Great Methodist Hall that evening. I met up with him in a pub after, but I was interested to know it was a haunt of clergymen. I hadn't seen him in months. But my decision not to live in his flat, but to get a place of my own, he said, "I feel abandoned." But he also told me that he was going off to work in New York for several months, so I wouldn't be seeing him again either. He got on his motorcycle and off he went home. I took the tube back and I found myself sitting across from 2 girls who looked like sisters and were, well, partly because they were both dressed in identical fawn trouser suits. The older of the 2, who looked to be about 9 years old, reached in her pocket and pulled out a roll of American dollars. She said, "See these?" I said, "Yeah, but you should maybe put them away, otherwise someone might try and take them from you." She just shrugged and looked out the window, which I thought was a bit pretentious, because all there was out the window was just the dark tunnels clattering by. The next week, I stayed much closer to home. I needed to save money. Perhaps it got cold, so perhaps believing I was saving money, I spent a lot of my afternoons sitting in this cheap cafe around the corner with the tables bolted to the floor and kind of the steam, the condensation clouding up the windows. And I just read these books that I bought about crazes and controversies while I've been away. You know, Angry Dancing by C.J. Stone is about the rave scene of the early 90s. Now, I wasn't there, so it surprised me at how familiar the people seemed. I mean, for example, there's a story about how two young guys have their plans for cheap travel horribly squashed by the, to them, unforeseeable fact that Warrington has two railway stations. And they're there on Warrington Bank here at the end of this story, raging at the heavens, going, it only needs one. Warrington only needs one. And there's another story of some friend of his who lives on the 17th floor of a high-rise block and is apparently a genius, and he cultivates this extraordinary theory that the entire animal kingdom are in fact the results of genetic experiments by Atlantean scientists. Now, I'm kind of molding these two stories together, but at one time my life was full of people who had the kind of fearless intellect that could challenge conventional science, but couldn't get around to reading railway timetables. And they were the long-term unemployed. When I was by the time I was 16, I discovered I hadn't the aptitude for formal study, nor apparently for holding down a regular job. But I could commit myself to theatre work. I was happy working in theatre. And so it should have been obvious what my vocation was, but for some reason, I felt that I wasn't the right kind of person to become an actor. And what made it worse was everyone around me agreed, to the extent that the odd times I did go into the workforce, like to work for the civil service for a few weeks and to work at a greengrocer's, my colleagues at work had such a kind of zeal, such enthusiasm for disabusing me of any hope that it seemed like, to me, an unfairly ideological experience. Because at the same time, because of the era, and so it didn't seem like completely hopeless. It seemed maybe just possible that I would be able to be an actor, but I didn't know what to do. So I did really almost nothing except drift away from those who were so passionate in their discouragement. And this got me living in a bedsit in Didsbury, a pleasant leafy area of Manchester where a lot of big old buildings have been converted to bedsits. And many of my neighbors were also young and unemployed. A whole lot more were students at the university, and a whole bunch of them as well were the diaspora from the local mental hospital. And the three groups covered a narrow spectrum of competence and productivity and mingled freely. It was our kind of Paris kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, it was the early 70s. So we'd been raised to believe that choice had come to all and real poverty abolished. And we also believed, just because of the stuff that we saw on the TV and, you know, Tomorrow's World and programs like that, that technology in the future would mean that most people would be forced to share their jobs with other people. And we were kind of generously offering to relinquish our jobs so that those people who were hung up about careers and earning money and all that could. You know, we almost saw ourselves as a new, more thoughtful, meditative vanguard, you know. I mean, our only social program really discouraged light entertainment out of existence. But in that, we could congratulate ourselves on being more realistic than our immediate predecessors in the revolutionary 1960s. So we were this faded, crumpled bunch of geniuses, of tiny evolutionary steps forward, as we believe. Now, those of us who are doing their drifting outside of an institution like the mental hospital or the university would go and sign on unemployed at the Department of Health and Social Security on Clyde Road, single-story red brick building with no windows. And inside there, we felt it was a very different kind of mood and atmosphere. It seemed to us as though the staff were eager to let us know that while the government might evince a radiant belief in the rights to comfort of all, a very different mood was actually amongst the rank and file. I mean, basically, they approached us as scroungers. We felt that there was an unwritten rule never to let us know about any rights we had that we didn't actually inquire for. And also an even more unwritten secret rule to slow down the progress of our claims. We were just very suspicious of them and felt they were suspicious of us. And we might have expected the older people who worked there to have a more old-fashioned view of, work. And the ones that bothered us more in a way were the younger ones, because they must, if we thought about it, have been plucked from our side of the counter. I remember one of us told this story one time about how they were having an interview for something at the Department of Health and Social Security, and the young clerk smiled suddenly and said, "This must all seem very Kafkaesque to you." Well, everyone mulled it over, like Kafkaesque. What could he possibly mean? It was so fiendishly ambiguous. As an illustration, at one time, I went to a further education college in the early 70s, and in the common room of that place that had been painted green and purple by the students, there was a notice put on the wall, and it had 3 points on it. The first point was, it told of some horrible injustice that was being perpetrated in the name of apartheid in South Africa. The second point was it detailed some atrocity committed by the Americans in Indochina. And the third point was, and in this college, it said, only the staff are allowed to use the elevator. And I thought it was, I couldn't help laughing. I thought it was just magnificently crazy. It's a mad theory, but it's sublimely, as a theory, it's like, if you turn it round in your mind, then you'll find that for a few degrees of every revolution, it actually does shed off a beam of light, because what it's saying is all oppression is oppression. So it's only a difference in degrees between making ironic remarks to someone who is in no position to reply, to calling people in at unsociable hours, to actually going and hauling them out of their beds in the middle of the night, to shipping them off in trains. It's all just degrees. Now, I do admit that the full kind of list of the crimes committed against us was that someone had used a kind of slightly pretentious literary expression, and we had to use the stairs in this college. So it's small wonder that a shelf of books hasn't been written about our struggle. But there was something about being in that group of people, about being unemployed for a couple of years, that was really, truly, properly miserable. So much so that when I finally managed to kind of clamber out of it at about 19, I never went back. I mean, I didn't sign on unemployed in Canada or in England again for 20 odd years, despite having at sometimes quite serious financial difficulties to maneuver around. Well, so I was just busy recalling all that. I actually put the book down and looked out the window through the condensation in the cafe window, and I saw that the modern equivalent of Clyde Road was just across the road. I mean, times had changed. It was now called a job center, and it had windows, and it was done up in this kind of threadbare executive style. And I told myself, the way things were going, it might be important that I did actually qualify for benefits. I knew it wasn't going to look nice, look welcoming, but I knew there was going to be some nasty surprises in there. I mean, the whole pretense at opening doors, that was all long, long gone. So I looked at the place, and I tried to coax myself in by going, I tell you what, if you go in there, that will be like an investigation into the far end of the spectrum to the Westminster where you were last week. It will give you an overall, okay. So out of a kind of journalistic curiosity, I went into the building, and just in a kind of laughing, ironic, detached sort of way, I inquired about the possibility of applying for benefits. And the woman at the reception desk was actually very warm, friendly. And she said, yeah, absolutely, she said. And she arranged an appointment for me. I thanked her very much. And just as I was turning to leave, she said, and by the way, she said, if you are a minute late, you will have to arrange another appointment, which might lead to a delay of about 2 weeks. I nearly said, you know, tell you what, given the state of public transport, that's a bit. And then I realized no one had asked for my opinion. That evening, I went to see Janet. And I was walking back from Janet's to the station. I just decided to kind of swerve away from waiting on Harlesden Station and its kind of negative revelations about the nature of the place. And I went curling around Tubbs Lane, past the rail yards and the Pentecostal church, and directly to Willesden Junction Station. That place had such kind of place in my imagination. It was like as soon as I set foot on the platform, I knew what was wrong with the country. It was like magic, you know? And then the theories that I had, you couldn't sell them, you couldn't give them away. They're not worth recounting now, being concocted in ignorance and anyway, thoroughly partisan and skewed. And my mind kept presenting these theories to me as proudly as Ficino presenting the secrets of Hermes Trismegistus to Cosimo de Medici. It was like, let's get on with it. The Renaissance, yeah, we're ready. Alan, you know what's going on. Oh man, I remember that night as well. No train came for an hour and a half. No announcements were made. Occasionally rail workers would jog past us in the dark with, like, it seemed to me, their collars up so they didn't have to speak to us. And it got so it was actually past when the trains normally stopped, so we weren't even sure whether there'd be a train at all. And I was trying to calm myself down by reading this book, which was a kind of swiftly written journalistic account of the miners' strike. Well, by the time I got on the train, I was racked with self-righteous anger. Oh, it was miserable. And I mentioned this to Janet. She said, I'll tell you what, you know, next time we meet, maybe we should meet in the daytime so you don't have to do all that. So I turned up at my appointment at the job center a few minutes early. And this older guy came out, had a pencil mustache, I remember, and summoned me and led me to this windowless office that I felt walking into that office was like stepping onto a trap door back to the 1970s. He sat me down and he handed me a 36-page form, dryly advising me that the sooner I finished completing that form, then the sooner my claim could go through. He also told me that I would need to pick up a form from the tax office. I said, oh, that's a new requirement. That is a new requirement. Wow. Well, by the time I'd found the tax office and got the form from them, gathered all the information required for the 36-page form and filled in the 36-page form, really most of the week was gone. And I only discovered sort of by accident, really, when I queried what appeared to be an anomaly in my claim that, in fact, whereas in the old days, when I used to sign on rent and living allowance were covered by just the one claim, these days, in order to streamline things, help with the rent had been given to a different department, so I had to make a whole separate claim. Well, fighting the urge to just sit on a bench wondering where everything had gone wrong, I found a housing benefits office and I sat there wondering. I was there for about an hour and a half. And finally, the receptionist said, "Can I help you at all?" I explained what I was there for. She said, "Oh, no." She said, "No, the clerks have all gone home. You'll have to come back on Monday." Thanks, I said, but you know, by then also, I thought that I suspected I didn't have everything officially needed to prove that I lived at the place that I lived and paid the money that I did. All the landlord had given me was just a standard rent book, such as you can buy from W.H. Smith's. And I folded some cash in there every week and he initialed it. That was it. I wasn't at all sure that he would be helpful if I tried to get anything more formal. And that Saturday, the water heater broke on our floor. The woman who lived downstairs said, "You won't fix it." Well, since the guy I shared the floor with and the toilet and shower occasionally shat himself, I thought, and there's no hot water, that kind of moves this venue across some line of acceptability. So I decided to hand my notice in. It was the beginning of December anyway, so that fulfilled the original 6-month agreement. I mean, I knew on my budget I wasn't going to be able to find anything ideal, but at least the thing with fresh drawbacks would be that they'd be fresh. It's like if you're carrying heavy luggage along the road, if you stop and you switch hands, and for about 5 seconds it feels better. So, well, that'll do, I thought. So on the Monday morning, I embarked on my plan to find somewhere else to live. Now, this place I'd gotten so easily, really. I had it before I even knew I was looking, and I found it from a handwritten ad posted in a shop window. So I went back to that same shop. When I saw, scanning all the handwritten ads, that there was nothing new there, there was in fact only the original ad that I'd answered, now turning yellow and curling up. My mind told me this time it's going to be impossible. I don't know where I got its information from. I had to politely inquire of my mind, how do you know what's in shop windows all across London? Have hope. And so I set off, methodically checking handwritten ads in shop windows all the way up the Chiswick High Road and the side streets off either side, until all the way up to Hammersmith, which seemed full of promise but wasn't, and then up to Shepherd's Bush, where I didn't want to live anyway, and then doubled back along the Uxbridge Road for miles. It was a full day's work, and I was pretty tired by the time I decided to quit for the day. And I just, in the last shop window I looked in, there was an ad for, I thought it's not going to suit me because it was the attic room in a shared house, which no, I thought there was a no smoking rule, which to me, the idea of not smoking was like science fiction. It was like, do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe it's possible to live in a non-smoking place? It didn't seem reasonable, but I called the place anyway, and this very relaxed and confident young professional kind of guy said that maybe if you could come by tomorrow at the same time, there'll be someone here then to show you the place. So next day, in order to feel thorough, I went out, but the opposite way, out through Kew and Richmond and almost out into the country. I found a few phone numbers. I rang one, and this woman answered, and she said, you'll really like Ham. And then a moment later, she said, actually, this isn't going to work out, is it? I felt like we'd had a thwarted 2-year romance just in one phone call. It was weird. Anyway, I started doing that quite early so that I could go back to the house near Shepherd's Bush and find out about the attic room above there. I rang the doorbell. Rang it again. And started walking back to the bus stop. About a half an hour later, Bella I had spoken to on the phone yesterday rang my new mobile phone. He said, I'm sorry, he said, can't believe I've done that. I never do that kind of thing. If you could come by tomorrow, I promise my wife will be here to show you the place. Well, the next day, I took a day off my shop window safari and went up to see Janet, as she talked about in the afternoons, so that I wouldn't have the late night wait at Wilson Junction Station. And she just had another one of her writing projects turned down and had decided that at last it was time to start thinking about other ways of earning a living. And it happened that she'd heard there was a place at Gunnersbury Park, there was this office there that had leaflets on flower arranging courses that helped to professionally train us. So after lunch, we went there. And I remember we got there, and it was that early December day when you realize winter really has arrived, because it was 4 o'clock, barely 4 o'clock, and going dark already. The office that had the leaflets was closed until March. And so we just stood with our hands shoved in our pockets, peering through the gloom, trying to make out whether the pond was frozen or not. And Jim was fooling around with a football just at the edge of our vision. And he was so short still, you know, that every time he hit the ball, like he hit it with his stomach as much as his feet, just kind of fell back, laughing uproariously, and the ball trickled off in the opposite direction. And at one time, as he was scrambling back up to his feet, Janet, who looked over at him but seemed to have a mind on something else, just said in a kind of abstract, floating voice, "You'll have to take it a lot more seriously than that if you want to play for Liverpool, Jim." And I thought, you know, if he knew anything more, he'd know enough to be depressed. And the next moment, I thought, actually, what I want is what he's got. I mean, there's nothing original about the thought that soon enough we'll all be incapable of kicking a ball around a park and would consider it a great joy to be able to do so once again. But this is the moment that it occurred to me. Nothing changed, and everything changed. I don't know. I mean, my mind still kept coming up with judgments, opinions, observations, theories. But maybe there was something else there too. Maybe I was like an improving musician who was coming to understand the value of a bar's silence every now and then. And the other thing that happened that moment was I realized he's a person, that there was 3 of us there. I mean, up to that point, I'm sorry to say, I just thought of him as just Janet's rather delicate problem, her weird farting luggage. But I guess the knowledge that he was a human being had been building up all the time, because as soon as I realized, yeah, he's a person, I thought, and I like him. I felt like I'd got to know him already. Like, I liked the way that he wasn't particularly quick to be friendly. When he met new people, he'd kind of stare at them going, look, I hope you're not expecting any cute kid stuff. And I liked the way, I admired the way he continuously railed against the powerlessness of infancy, you know, but it must have been exhausting for Janet. But at all these junctures of the day, like when his shoelaces needed doing, or when his seatbelt needed unbuckling, when the toggles of his duffel coat needed undoing, he'd go, I'll do it. And then we'd all have to stand there for a few seconds as he kind of stared down at this stuff going, I don't get it. I don't get it. How is it? Oh. But I mean, he had a sense of humor. He was brave. He was interested in people. He could be very kind. Anyway, I went from seeing them. I left to go try 3rd time lucky at the no smoking house, as I called it. I got there, rang the doorbell, and then I heard this woman's voice coming from my knees. I looked down. She was speaking through the letterbox. She said, I can't believe this, she said. We've got guests staying. They've double locked the front door and I can't come out. I'm sorry, you're going to have to come round the back and we'll have to discuss this over the wall. Well, I went around the back of the house and the garden wall was 6 feet tall. So she had to keep jumping up and down. She was talking to me. I could see she had rather nice blonde hair. Seemed to be a nice face, but I never got much of a look. She just bounced up and down. She said, sorry, you must think we're hopeless. But I didn't, of course. I thought I was hopeless. So the next day I went out to Brentford, Ealing, Hanwell, phoned up some guy. He didn't call back. So in trying to decide whether to kind of press the issue with whoever this person was, I went and looked at the house that he'd shown me, and I could see that the bedroom had, probably the one they were renting, had no curtains, and there was a collection of unusual beer bottles on the windowsill. So I never really pursued that one. I did a little bit of shop window safari the next day, but I had to cut it short because I needed to sign on unemployed at 4 o'clock. I still hadn't received any money. It's a few weeks since I started trying, but I had to go and sign on. So I went to the job center, and the guy there told me, young clerk, he said, actually, you need this form from the tax people. I said, I've never heard of this form. He said, well, you still need it. So I was like crazy determined to try and get this done before the end of the weekend so that my plane wouldn't get postponed anymore. So I dashed out of there, and I dashed straight to the station to get the train to Hammersmith. I bought a ticket to Hammersmith, and I got to the top of the stairs, and there was a handwritten sign there saying all the trains were cancelled. So I went to the ticket office, and I was just about to start a row. The guy could see what was going on, so he just slid the money back to me, took the useless, pointless ticket, tore it up, and I went out of the station to find a call box. And then it took me a few goes to find one that worked, but I did. And I called the tax office, and this fella said, that form, he said, is usually handed out by the employers. I said, well, all I know is what I've been told. So he said, can I ask what trade or profession you're in? I told him, and he said, that form is only used by people in the building trade. Thank you, I said, put the phone down. Dashed back to the job center, worried that the place might have closed already. It was just about open. I ran up the stairs into this big room that had emptied while I'd been away from it, except for my clerk, who was at the far end stuffing some folders into his briefcase. I went up to him and I told him. He looked at me and he said, then you don't need that form. And a little voice in my head said, welcome home. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for staying and listening. I love you all. Oh, you're all unmuted. Are you all unmuted? Oh, yeah. You can unmute yourselves. Fantastic that you came. Thank you so much for coming.